The lack of affordable housing is one of the major grievances of working class people all across the United States. I've talked to people on the street in the course of asking people to pose for a photograph, holding a sign saying that we the people want affordable housing for all, and to get it we aim to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy, and no rich and no poor. And in the course of talking to people, I've discovered that lots of people are aware of the fact that there are tent cities of thousands of people because of the lack of affordable housing. The question that I want to address here in this video is two questions. One, how come there is a lack of affordable housing? And two, how can we get affordable housing for all? Well, the reason that there's a lack of affordable housing is essentially because we live in a dictatorship of the rich, and the rich don't want there to be affordable housing for all. The rich want people to be economically insecure. The rich have all sorts of policies that they've been implementing, especially starting in the 70s, in response to the so-called radical 60s, which scared the hell out of the rich because people were rising up against the authorities, both the governmental and private business authorities, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. The anti-apartheid movement, in South Africa, and the worldwide support for it. The rich were scared, and they started implementing policies that were designed to make people economically and psychologically insecure. So they started taking away people's assurance that they would have medical care when they needed it. They created the infamous HMOs that would tell people that you couldn't have the health care that you needed. They started making the children in the public schools insecure by instituting these atrocious standardized tests called high-stakes standardized tests, because if you didn't get a good enough score, you couldn't graduate. These kids were being told that they weren't good enough to even deserve a decent job if they didn't get a good enough score, and that the reason they didn't get good enough score was because they weren't smart enough or they didn't work hard enough. Whereas the truth, of course, is that the tests were designed to guarantee a certain large number of failing scores, especially to the children from the poorest families. One way this was done, and you can read about in one of the articles I'm going to link, they would have test questions that required for a correct answer almost the exact wording in a textbook, but the poor kids in the poor schools didn't even have the textbook to read. I mean, this was all designed to make people feel economically and psychologically insecure. They started creating a two-tier wage system so that young men who would go to work in a factory, like in an automobile factory around the 70s, would be paid much less than their fathers, who were doing essentially the same job. And again, the purpose was to drive people's expectations about what they could expect in life down low, because the ruling class hired a bunch of experts to ask them, what the hell explains the radical 60s, and the experts told them, I think correctly, that a good deal of the explanation is what they called rising expectations, that people in the 60s had rising expectations because actually economic inequality in the 60s was lower. There was more equality, less of a difference between the CEO and the average worker in the 60s than there had been before. And people felt economically secure enough to start thinking about changing society in big ways to make it more democratic and equal, to end unjust wars and so forth. And they had the security and the confidence to, engage in massive demonstrations and building takeovers like I was part of to get rid of ROTC at Dartmouth. Uh, a lot of this was because we weren't as worried about getting a job and surviving in the 60s as the younger generation today, our children, is worried. And what makes the people today so worried was the deliberate policies to lower our expectations in life so that we would be more easily controlled. And part of lowering people's expectations is making them think that there's no affordable housing for them, that they're on one step away from having to live in a tent. And of course, many thousands of people are living in tents. To make people think that even though their family for generations lived in their neighborhood, that they're going to have to move out because the rents are going up and the property taxes are going up. And this, of course, is gentrification. It's happening all over. And this is done on purpose by the dictatorship of the rich to make us more controllable. So that's why, in order to get affordable housing for all, we have to remove the rich from power. And that means having real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor. So what would that mean if we remove the rich from power and had no rich and no poor? How would that make affordable housing for all happen? Well, we're talking about an egalitarian society. One of the one of the kinds of laws that the local assembly of egalitarians would probably pass is that squatting is legal. That would mean that people who are contributing reasonably according to ability, contributing to the economy by doing something according to reasonable ability, they would have the right to live in a house or apartment that they were dwelling in for free, as long as it was safe and that the number of people living in it was reasonable for the size of the apartment. It would be theirs essentially to own. They wouldn't have to pay rent or pay a mortgage to anybody. Squatting would be legal for such people. Well, right away, that would increase the amount of affordable housing. But if more housing needed to be built, instead of having rich developers, as today, build luxury housing, because this is how they make the most profit, the law would be that the egalitarians in the local assembly, the people, in other words, in the local community, who support the values of no rich and no poor equality and mutual aid, people helping each other, which would be the vast majority of people in most communities, they, assembled in their local assembly, would be the only ones to decide what gets built in their community and for what purpose. It wouldn't be like today when the rich developers say we're going to build luxury housing here, and the mayor, who's in the pockets of the big money developers, appoints people on the zoning commission or whatever the body is in that particular city who are going to go along with the big money developers, and people are allowed to blow off steam at some city-sponsored public hearing, but that's all. They just blow off steam, and except for maybe a tiny detail in what gets built, like what color it's painted or something, the people get ignored. And the politicians run for office saying, vote for me, I'm going to get affordable housing, and they get elected, but there's still no affordable housing because it's a dictatorship of the rich. The politicians either go along with the rich or they get ignored as well. Well, that's the problem we have today. And if we remove the rich from power, only the egalitarians in the local community will be the ones to decide what gets built, and if they need more housing for people, that's what they'll decide to build. It's not really complicated. What makes it maybe seem complicated is that any normal, sensible discussion about the solution to the problem of lack of affordable housing, i.e., the need to remove the rich from power, is censored. And in the lack of any conversation about solving the problem in which you're allowed to actually say what the solution is, what's left is a bunch of nonsense that doesn't really solve the problem and makes it seem like it's, oh, so complicated, it's impossible to solve. And that's what the rich want us to think, that, oh, this is such a difficult problem. Oh, there's no solution to it, you know. BS. But, you know, the organizations that exist today, the progressive organizations, are all controlled by big money. That's where they get their rent money from, the big foundations, the Heinz and Ford, Soros, Rockefeller foundations. That's where all the progressive organizations large enough to rent an office, that's where they get their money, and the leaders know it, and so they never dare say, you know, we need to remove the rich from power. And as I discovered in my little neighborhood of Brighton and Allston, part of Boston, the leaders of the organization that purports to be about uniting everybody in the neighborhood to fight for affordable housing, they will not permit anybody in the organization to even mention removing the rich from power when they post anything to the organization's email group. And it's little cliques of these kind of extremely anti-democratic people that are basically running the show with the approval of the rich in towns all across the United States. And we've got to break through their control by going directly to the people and building a movement that's independent of this clique of little progressive leaders who are afraid to even talk about what the real solution is to the problem that they purport to be trying to solve. Okay, I've posted some articles at the bottom of this video that are all about what I've been talking about. I hope you give them a read, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you.